everyone. Welcome to today's Work Truck webinar, 3 Hidden Upfitting Risks and the Playbook for Avoiding Them, presented by Adrian. I'm Shelby Mika, a contributing writer for Work Truck, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. So during the webinar, we encourage you to ask questions. You can just throw those in the chat and they'll roll into our queue. We're going to try to get through all of them today, but if we don't get to yours, don't worry. We will follow up by email and get you a response after the event. Today, I'm joined by 2 fantastic speakers from Adrian. We have Kevin Kiedrow, Fleet Account Executive, and Shelby Simpson, Strategic Partnerships Manager. Kevin, Shelby, welcome to the Work Truck webinar. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Doing great.
Great. Thank you.
Great to see you. So let's just start by giving us a brief introduction about your role with Adrian and how you work with fleets.
Okay. I'll start, I guess. My name is Shelby Simpson, Strategic Partnerships Manager at Adrian. In my role, I act as the liaison between our company and fleet management companies. So basically, we are working together on strategic opportunities to grow together. I'm also supporting the fleet account executives, the sales team with the fleet management companies.
Great. Kevin, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin Kiedrow, Fleet Account Executive. And it's hard to believe I've spent over 2 decades in the fleet industry. But my background is, anything from order planning, vehicle acquisition, upfit, TCO analysis, financing, maintenance, all that kind of great stuff. And in my current role with Adrian, I support our national fleet customers, ones that are headquartered in the Western US. And those companies typically factory order their vehicles and use our ship through upfit process. So I know the last 12 months have been kind of a challenging time for some fleets, and we've seen a lot of increased risk related to upfit. And so today we're going to highlight some of those risks and talk about impact and give you some kind of real world examples on ways to avoid them.
Yeah, that's great. You guys are the exact right people to be here today. So I'm so glad you could take the time. All right, let's go to the next slide and look at what we'll be talking about today. Kevin teed it up perfectly. We're going to be talking about the 3 biggest risks before, during, and after an upfit. We'll talk about some tips for mitigating those risks, how to evaluate your upfitting partner, and practical ways to reduce upfit-related downtime. And, we know that D word, downtime, it's a dirty word in the fleet industry. We don't want it because a sidelined vehicle means lost revenue. And so really a lot of what we're going to talk about is how to reduce some of that downtime. I know a recent survey shows that vehicle downtime is the biggest challenge fleets face when working with their upfitting partner. And so we're going to look at the formula for getting a great upfit while also reducing that downtime that it takes to get your vehicles equipped with all of the shelving, dividers, everything that you need to get the job done. And before we go to the next slide, real quick, I just want to give everybody a heads up that we are going to be asking some pop-up survey questions throughout the webinar. So you will see that pop up on your screens, and go ahead and just answer each one, and then we will do reveal the results and talk a little bit about what we're seeing from you guys. So we want to hear from the audience, and let's go ahead and go to our first question. So the first one is, what is the top quality you look for in an upfit partner? So options are price, product quality, project management expertise, timelines, customization, customer service, and then other. So we will go ahead and give everybody a minute to respond to that. And it'll take about a minute for results to come rolling in here. I know what our next slide is over, Kevin and Shelby, so I don't want you guys to weigh in too much here, but if you had to guess, what do you think our top result is going to be?
I'm gonna say I'm curious on the answer, because there's kind of what people say and then there's how people act. So and a lot of that has to do with stakeholder competition in the organization. So a lot of times you have arm wrestling over different priorities. So I'm going to see who wins this one. I don't know. What do you think, Shelby?
I'm going to bet on either quality or price at this point. I think quality is extremely important to our customers. So
yeah, and you know, based on what I'm looking at here, right now that is the top result is product quality, 35% for that. I'm surprised price isn't higher, honestly. You know, because there are so many concerns about budgets, and everybody is always focused on reducing costs. But this audience seems to really get the product quality aspect of upfitting. So that's great. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. And so this is another pop-up question you'll be seeing here. And it's, what is the top consequence of missed or delayed upfit timelines? So choices are reduced fleet availability or workflow disruptions, lost revenue, increased costs for things like rentals and vehicle storage, decreased customer satisfaction, or other. Any predictions here, guys?
let's see.
And for those in the audience, this is just based on your personal experience. So, you know, if you've experienced a missed or delayed timeline, you know, what hurt the most for you?
And I would guess that increased cost, not having their vehicles. So that disrupts their workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm probably go with the lost revenue piece, because I just like a lot of the, whether it's like plumbing, HVAC, electrical, last mile delivery, like most of the vehicles going through the upfit process end up being revenue generating vehicles. So if a customer is ordering those vehicles, they probably are sensitive to a timeline, they're sensitive to a budget, and they need those vehicles to be delivered on time and generating revenue. So that's probably where my eyes go on this chart.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys are both right, because the reduced fleet availability or disruptions to workflow is ranking #1, followed closely by decreased customer satisfaction. So definitely, I think our audience is connecting the dots between being able to deliver for their customers and having that vehicle on premise to do that. And then followed shortly after by lost revenue. So, and it is kind of that chain of events, right? Is if you don't have the vehicle, you can't service the customer, then you lose the revenue. So I think these all kind of tie together. So I'm not surprised to see these at the top. All right, well, let's go on to the next slide and dig into the risks. So risk #1, you know, we're getting back to that first survey question about, you know, what do you look for most? And certainly price and product quality are really important. But as you can see on the screen, 64% of fleet professionals said supplier coordination was their #1 upfit challenge. So, you know, pre-pandemic, it was not so hard maybe to go through the upfitting process, but OEM production schedules are a little less predictable these days. And it's just a more complex process. Would you guys agree with that? That today,
For sure.
That's what I figured. And, you know, like the longer it takes to get your vehicles, again, you're losing revenue and impacting customer service. So what we're really looking at here is, how can project management fix this problem? Like, why is that so important in today's upfitting process? So what I'd love to hear from you guys is, like, let's put this into context. Can you give us a real world example of how getting project management right pays off, and like why that's so important?
I can actually, I'll start. I know Kevin can give many examples, but, you know, I think it's that early communication, getting all of the stakeholders aligned. When the OEM and the fleet management company and the customer aren't speaking to each other, aren't planning, aren't talking about any upcoming changes, that's when we experience those bottlenecks in the process, delays, increased costs, things like that. So, at Adrian, we have this process we call foundation, but we're adamant about getting those people involved early, talking early, planning, making sure that people are accountable for their piece of the process. So, and following those timelines. So we establish those early on.
Yeah, that's really important. Like, get everybody on the same page before you're already halfway through the process and realizing there may be glitches that pop up or something like that. Kevin, can you give us a couple examples?
Yeah, I'd say, Shelby alluded to that foundation process, but like at Adrian, we're often the last ones holding the vehicle before it gets in the customer's hands. So it's that, there's kind of two key points in a vehicle's life cycle. And the first one is the budget. Did I get my budget approved? And like, when can I order my vehicle? And the next one is like, where is it? When's it going to be delivered? And so we're the where is it people. And so what we do from a process is we work backwards. So we work with customers and vendors to say, when do you need this vehicle in the field, ready to go and working for you? And then we'll build a map to get that vehicle delivered on time, on budget, all those kind of things. But the way that we do it is probably unique in the industry. And so we have a cross-functional team that all works together through the process and continues to communicate with anyone that's involved in that vehicle to make sure we're all on the same page. Because was it Mike Tyson? I said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And so whether it's a supply chain issue, whether it's a weather event, whether it's the factory shut down for a certain amount of time, like, you've got to account for those things. And so we've got enough experience and a dedicated team that is able to handle that and overcome that. So that's kind of how we handle that, getting the vehicle from, it's approved and it's ordered to it's delivered.
And so why does getting that right matter so much for fleets? Like, why is that project management element something that they should really seek out in an upfitting partner? Or what are the outcomes when you get it right, or conversely when you get it wrong?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll kick this one off, Shelby, and hand over to you. But like, a lot of the conversations that we're in, especially in this year in 2025, has to do with a lot around price, a lot around supply chain, a lot around tariffs and some of those things. I think we had a weather event earlier this year, like hailstorms and stuff like that. And so the project management piece of it's key because it's, anyone can order your vehicle, anyone can build you a shelf to put in the vehicle or install some graphics on the side, those sorts of things. But the timing matters. Like, what we hear from customers is the quality matters, the timing matters. I want to have things done in a process that I can follow, that makes sense, that I can communicate to in the organization, that I can communicate to my end customers, to my drivers, so they know what's happening when it's happening. Because it's a lot around expectation management, and so you want to have things done according to your plan that meets business goals or net zero goals, or those sorts of things. So a lot of times we're incorporating, high level business plans, plus we're incorporating field needs. So we're getting field feedback from those drivers, technicians, branch managers. And so it's kind of a meld of those two, but achieving that takes a lot of communication and a defined process. And so that's why we feel like we stand out, because we meld those two things really well.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Well said.
Yeah, agreed. Well, that's a great thing to look for in an upfitter, but it also seems a little bit elusive. What kinds of questions could a fleet manager ask an upfitter to evaluate whether they're going to be good at that? How do you know? How do you figure that out if you're considering a partner?
You can ask questions like, what's your communication cadence? How often do you provide status? Do you provide status by VIN, by unit number? Like, how are you communicating that? Who do you have involved in your meetings? Is it, there's different things that you can ask, like regarding the OEM, the FMC. So if you're ordering your vehicles, you make sure that Adrian is communicating with the OEM and the FMC is communicating with Adrian. So it's just making sure that your upfitter is on page with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like having those relationships is so important.
Yeah. I like that a lot. And I like, I always go back to third-party stories. So it's like, fleet managers, procurement, those people are not necessarily on an island. Like they're in conversations with their coworkers and their, people in their same role in the industry. So ask your industry peers who they're working with and why. Talk with them about what was important to them. How did they achieve that? What's their consideration? What's their tree that they go through making that decision? And and so much of this in the last couple of years has been meeting the customer where they're at. So we talk about someone says, "Hey, can I work with you? How do you guys work?" And we're like, well, there's a certain way that we work, but also we have the flexibility to meet customers where they're at. And maybe Shelby can speak to this or piggyback off this, but we have the ability to, we have the ship through, we have a distributor, we have a road ready. And so we really have done kind of built this thing out to be more robust so that we can service customers in the way that they want to be taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a conversation, and that's an offering that we can make to our customers is, how are you bringing your vehicles to market? What are your needs? It can be multiple ways that they're bringing them to market. So, having those conversations early with the customer and putting together a plan. So, we have ship through, we have a program we call Road Ready. We have a field program through our distributors. So it's, it's all about the communication and understanding what we can offer and what the customer's needs are.
Yeah, I love that. So really, when we're in the before and upfit process, it's evaluating potential partners based on what your peers are saying, asking those questions about, what do they do to coordinate with all the players involved. And you really want to choose a partner that values project management. So you're speaking of communication. That's a perfect segue to our next pop-up survey question. So let's look at that. And this one is, how much does your upfitting partner vendor communicate with you throughout the process? So a lot, you're always in the know. Some, I hear from them once in a while. A little, I often wonder what's going on. Or none, it's a mystery until the vehicles arrive. I hope we don't get too many nuns, because that's rough stuff right there. Would you agree?
Yes.
I would say that's rough, and I would say it's not uncommon. I think, once sometimes people will take an order and then they go, we'll just kind of get to it when we can get to it, and we'll let you know when it's done. But that's not really helpful to a lot of fleets.
Yeah, and it's like you're kind of stuck. Like the upfitter has your vehicle, and then you're operating on their terms, right? If they're not communicating with you, it's like, well, they're just going to do whatever they want, and hopefully I'll get my vehicle on time or somewhere around there.
Our upfits are, anywhere from a small multi-$100 investment to a $20,000, $30,000+ investment. So depending on the complexity of the upfit and, the more complex the upfit, likely the more revenue you're looking to generate with that vehicle. So you want that on the road as quick as possible. And so if I think about other contractors I've hired around the house to do a floor or a deck or something like that, if they're not communicating with me, we have an issue. So communication, to Shelby, Shelby's point earlier, is like, it's really everything. And the more expensive or the more units that you're putting through, it's really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you related that to, a home example. And I'll just add on, like, just the anxiety of not knowing where things are is not something that any fleet manager needs in their day, right?
No. Well, it's important.
Sorry, go ahead, Shelby.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on Kevin, but it's important also to proactively communicate. So, if something's not going the way you need it to go, or if there's risk, it's hard for the customer to find that out after the fact and have to ask the question, where's my vehicle? What's going on? So I think that proactive communication just to let them know what's going on is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it looks like we've got a quarter of our audience is always in the know. So glad to hear that that those of you are getting that kind of communication. Half of the audience says I hear from them occasionally, and then 20% a little, and 5% none. So yeah, maybe those none people want to maybe think about that communication piece and have a discussion with their upfit partner.
Yeah, I think the occasionals too. I'm curious on maybe a takeaway from this would be like, is occasional enough for you? So it's really, we talk about meeting the customers where they're at from an upfit, from a build perspective, but also from a communication perspective. I think different stakeholders need different updates at different times. So, is occasionally enough, and what does that mean? And, just kind of diving deep on that. So I guess the way that we approach our customer relationships, our partner relationships, is really getting to understand them and what they're communicating inside their organization and what their expectations are, because every customer is different. Every supplier is different. It's really understanding that so that you can deliver on those expectations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this leads us perfectly into our next slide, and that's risk number 2, which happens during the upfit. And the risk is really taking a hands-off approach to the upfitting process. And survey shows that nearly 2/3 of fleet professionals say coordination of parties is their biggest challenge with the upfit process. And so I think that's a real opportunity for the upfitting partner to come in and handle that. And just like you said, Shelby, proactive communication is key to having a good relationship with your customer, making sure everybody's in the know and is comfortable where things are at. So, how do fleets know whether they're working with a partner that does this, communication? I mean, we've talked about the coordination, but again, how do we evaluate this? I mean, it's not something it's something that'd be hard to like put in an RFP and say, how can you prove that you have communication? What kinds of questions can people ask partners on this?
Let me think.
I would say it comes back to what the process is. So we talked about risk and the risk of not communicating, the risk of not keeping someone updated is that they're going to miss their timelines, deadlines, budget, goals, that sort of thing. So maybe you can look at metrics like, how quickly am I getting my quote back when I request a quote? How quickly are units moving through the process once they land at the upfitter? How many vehicles have they upfit of this type or this platform over the past 12 months, 24 months? So like, are they familiar with this vehicle? Are they familiar with this upfit? Is this kind of a common thing? If you're looking for kind of a new upfit, some customization, do you have an engineering team? What does that look like? Can I customize my vehicles? So kind of getting familiar with the ins and outs of the company a little bit, I think would help people understand kind of an understanding of like who you're working with and what their capabilities are before you even get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to add there, Shelby?
I think also just asking questions about the process, about finding out how much they understand about, the different stakeholders, the process, vehicle installation. So asking, turnaround time, like Kevin said, like how quickly you get a quote back. Ask all the questions you can about what the upfitter's process is for getting your vehicle through. I think that'll give you a good idea of how well they operate.
Yeah, that's great advice. Speaking of communication, when that element isn't there, how does that impact costs?
Well,
and greatly impact cost.
I was going to say, it ain't good.
Yeah.
So I think, when you think about if you don't have communication, if you're not connected, if you're updating someone every so often or never, then maybe you have delays, which impacts your ability to generate revenue. Maybe you're not getting things done on time, so maybe you're paying to park vehicles somewhere, or maybe you miss a window to get certain parts or certain ship through priorities with a OEM, or maybe you have a weather event that happens because vehicles should have been on the road, but instead they're parked at a facility waiting to get upfit. So there's a lot of those things that those risks from a budget standpoint and a timing standpoint that you're trying to avoid by good communication. And sometimes the news isn't good. Sometimes there's, hey, we're waiting on a part and it's coming from Italy or somewhere, and so it's going to be an extra 30 days. But at least customers can kind of reset the expectation in their business and say, okay, I know we were planning on these goals or this delivery, but we're going to have to push back. But the good news is, I heard from Adrian, it's still in process, like things are a go, versus like, I don't know, I haven't heard anything and I don't know what to plan, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that ability to plan because you've been communicated with is huge. I mean, it's like plan A doesn't always happen. No one's perfect, bumps in the road and whatnot. But if you know about it, then at least you can go to plan B. Right.
It's funny. We make some of our own product and we install that. We also install product that's not Adrian. So we'll work with a lot of different vendors and suppliers and those sorts of things. So communicating with them, sometimes we get bad news from them too, which then we have to relay to the customer. So, if we just held on to that and didn't communicate that wouldn't be a good thing either. So that's why I say sometimes the news that we're giving is bad news. It may not have anything to do with us, but it's really timeline management. And so that customers can run their business in a way that's uninterrupted by something that's happening that, it's out of our control. So from our standpoint, we're trying to control as much as we can in the process, and communication is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Shelby, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to, when Kevin was talking about that communication, it can cost the customer so much, delays, additional money. I was thinking back at the beginning, if a customer's ordering their vehicles and it's not communicated to the upfitter, how do we know that we can have their product ready? What can happen is vehicles can show up, we're not ready to upfit, they sit for a period of time, which costs the customer. That can end up in storage fees, different things like that. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of that communication and sharing that early on and throughout the process.
Absolutely.
That's great. And as much as it's communication with the customer, I talked about our cross-functional team and foundation and the way that we work. So internal communication in our business is key too. So we have these terms, these acronyms, which I'm sure every business does, but we talk about like a UFO or a VOG. And folks on the call might not know what that is, but Shelby and I definitely know what that is. And so our goal is to avoid units showing up that we didn't know about, that we didn't have a plan for, or units that are on the lot that are really delayed in getting off the lot. So a lot of that is internal management with our installers and our distributors and making sure that we have parts when we need them, supplies when we need them, and that we're getting things are moving and that we're aware that we're planning. So sometimes we over communicate and, with customers or with vendors. And so they'll say, thanks, that's your third call this week. But really we just want to know so that we're properly allocated and planned for those things.
Yeah, over communication, always better than under communication, right? Let's look at our next pop-up survey question. So how responsive is your upfitter when parts issues arise in the field? Let's see how the audience evaluates their partners on this. Are they very responsive, somewhat responsive, a little responsive, or not responsive at all? Any guesses, guys, on where you think this is going to land?
I've seen it.
You guys aren't betting. You're not betting, folks. Right?
I've seen it a lot of different ways. I don't, for the folks that are joining, I don't know what their experience is. I've seen it a lot of different ways. I've seen it where there's there are people that are more accountable, and there are people that go like this, and it's, I don't know who it is. So, what department, who do I call, that sort of thing. I'm really curious to see how this pans out.
Well, it looks like it's split like almost evenly. Somewhat responsive is the top response, but very and a little are tied. So it's kind of all over the map, which is good to know. Because again, if this isn't happening for you and you're not being alerted when an issue arises, then that could be costing you money, right?
Yeah, I think one thing, and maybe this sets us apart, maybe it doesn't, but when you have an upfit where you need some support and you reach out to Adrian, you will talk to an actual person, and that person will call you back, will email you back, will walk through it, hold your hand, make sure that you get what you need. If it's an Adrian part, a lot of times we're same day, next day, we can make our own parts within 5 days and get those out. So if you're ordering something that we make, you'll have expedited service or supplies or repairs on that. If it's an outside part, at least we'll get that going and we'll get that moving, and you'll have a person that you're working with. So hopefully there's a little solace or confidence in that.
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect lead into our third risk, which is what happens after an upfit. So it's like once you get those vehicles on the road, you're stoked, business is happening, and a lot of people just kind of like forget about it and move on, and that's perfectly understandable. But if the upfit isn't working properly for the operator, that can have impacts on safety, productivity, customer satisfaction, all of it, which rolls up into costs. So let's just talk a little bit about like why it's so important to, as a fleet manager, to follow up with your operators or technicians or what have you, and find out what's going right and what's going wrong. So like what happens when vehicle operators aren't happy with their upfit? Like any examples there that you can provide?
Well, I think when the fleet managers are communicating with their field, and we're talking to the fleet managers, then we have a better understanding of, is the upfit working for them? Is it efficient enough? Those are all things that we use to evaluate like how we work our process. So we want to understand how your technicians are doing their job, what can help them do it better. So that communication is extremely important for us. And if they're having an issue with a part, we have, and most upfitters do, I'm sure, have a customer experience team that's there to handle any issues that they're having. So, I think Adrian has always been really good at taking care of customers, especially when they're having issues with parts or anything like that. You just reach out to us and we take care of it. So,
yeah, you haven't forgotten about them just because they paid the bill. You're giving that after sales support to make sure everything's going right. And as I understand it, you incorporate some of that driver feedback into your engineering process then, is that right?
Correct. And, the end user, the technician, is our customer. So they're the ones using our product. They're the ones talking about our product. So it's important to us that they get what they need and they're happy.
And as you evolve your product, then I would imagine that kind of minimizes issues moving forward so that there are just fewer and fewer as you go because you address them in the engineering process.
Yes. And our product, our manufactured product, it goes through rigorous testing. So, we're compliant with FMVSS. We have close relationships with the OEM on the engineering side, all the way up to our leadership level. So, we adhere to those standards because quality safety is so important to us. And, obviously the safety of our customers is the ultimate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say
Ivan, what do you think?
if I could piggyback on that. Yeah, I would say, I guess, when I think about risk, I mean, risk number one is someone gets hurt on the job, which you never want. So a lot of our consideration has to do with ergonomics and safety. And then risk number two is that person leaves the company because they don't have a good tool in a vehicle that they can use, or they have such a challenge using that tool that the company provided to them. It's not safe. It's not ergonomic. It doesn't, it makes their day more difficult than it otherwise could be. And so then they start looking at, well, what's another company I could go work at? So when we're making product, when we're installing product, when we're working with customers, we're thinking about employee retention. We're thinking about safety, ergonomics, those sorts of things too. And so, we're a blue collar company, pun intended, but I have mine on today, but we, our goal is to get as close to the work as possible. So what we propose to a lot of clients and prospective clients, and we talked about how do you evaluate someone, is we'll come on site and we'll do a site visit and we'll talk with your technicians, your branch managers, the people that are doing the actual work, and we'll figure out, how can we make them more productive? How can we make their day easier? How do we make their vehicle more safe? And then, a lot of times that's me and that's my engineering partner, and we're shoulder to shoulder. And so we'll bring an equipment scanner. And so we'll scan all the equipment so we can put that in CAD and we can actually build a vehicle for them. And then we'll bring a scale, we'll weigh everything. And then we'll make sure that, whether they want to stay under DOT limits, or if they have a certain drawer that pulls out, or shelf that opens up, shelf that slides out, or something that opens up, and they say, it's got to be within a certain weight tolerance, or carry a certain capacity or a certain height, and those sorts of things. So it's, from an engineering standpoint, like, we walk it all the way back to what's happening in the vehicle, who's doing the work, and incorporate all that into the build. And so that kind of customization isn't just, here's something off the shelf that you can take. That's, actually designing a vehicle that meets the customer where they're at. And then, and then our ability to do that, not for just one or two or three vehicles, but for a fleet. So like, if you see large fleets that are out there that have Adrian product in them, I mean, we're doing that by the hundreds. So we do the customization, and then we can install and upfit by the hundreds or by the thousands.
Yeah, that's so great. So it's you're watching out for everybody, basically.
Sure.
Yeah, you can roll out improvements to the entire fleet. Are there any specific examples of an improvement you guys have incorporated, or even when you've, visited a customer, the kind of thing that you might customize for them to make it work better for their operators?
We have. Obviously, I'm not going to mention a customer, but we do have a customer that we've been working with for years, and they had an initiative to change the way that they were doing their business. And so we created a solution for them, and not only installed it in their new vehicles, but also all of the vehicles in their field, which we ran through a different channel of our business. But that's been successful. And, that's just one example, but we do that all the time for customers. And because we can be flexible and we have different ways to manage upfitting, whether it's, new factory ordered vehicles, out of stock vehicles, vehicles that are already in the field, we can retrofit those. So possibilities are endless.
Yeah, that's so great. I love thinking about. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say one of the dots I've been connecting for people as I've been in this role, over the last 12 months and traveling, is there are a lot of customers and prospective customers and companies that are used to working with someone locally in their market. So they would say, "Hey, I need a certain vehicle customized with an upfit a certain way," and then. But we do that from a national perspective, from a fleet perspective. So if you have vehicles throughout the country, we can upfit them. So I think we talked before about meeting the customer where they're at. So we have the ability to do that local install through our distributors. We also have our Road Ready program, which can support a fleet upfit and kind of take that upfit through the distributor level. But then from a national standpoint, we can do a lot of customization even with these big national fleets. And we install those at a ship-through facility. So we can churn out a bunch of vehicles at a time that are actually custom. And I think a lot of people didn't understand that about the business. So when I talk about doing a site visit, learning about a customer and taking that feedback, incorporating into an upfit, we can do that for 100 vehicles or 500 or 1,000 vehicles. And that's probably something that people were telling me that they didn't really understand about the ability to customize those things to fit their needs. They probably thought they had to take something off the shelf, or that we sold shelves and slide outs and those sorts of things, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, getting that configuration right is huge for, like you said, safety, productivity, ultimately customer satisfaction. Do you have everything that you need to service a customer? And I mean, getting that right really does tie directly to revenue. Let's go to our next slide. And so let's just talk about the formula for reducing upfit downtime. So we know people want a quality product. We know they want a reasonable price. And then, you know, the three things that we've been talking about are expert project management, proactive communication, and strong after-sales support. So those factors together create a quality upfit, less downtime, and you're getting something that really works for your fleet and your operators. I know we've kind of talked about this, but you know, are these attributes that Adrian values, and anything that you want to say about this formula and why all of these factors matter?
I think the quality product, reasonable price, expert project management, proactive communication. I mean, those are all things that we practice. Those are all things we agree that is a good formula for reducing downtime. Ultimately, what we want for a customer is to understand what their expectations are and their needs, put together a plan so that when their vehicles are ordered and show up at the installer, they're ready to be upfit and get them out the door, so that, you know, we can meet the expectations of when their vehicles need to be in the field. We reduce the downtime, the interim interest, you know, and ultimately will end in success for the customer. So I think that's the formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Kevin?
It really is. I was going to say, you know, like these days, to me, like quality is the expectation. Like, what do you say? Like, quality is table stakes. Like, you know, it's just what's expected. So, so if you don't have quality, you're not in the conversation. You're not in the game as an upfitter. So every upfitter's got quality product. But I think the piece that gets lost a lot is the project management. And so just like we can meet customers where they're at from an install perspective, having a vehicle ready for the market, we can also meet them from a project management perspective. So like some companies might have a whole team of people that are involved in the upfit or the planning or the ordering, or they might work with a fleet management company who handles a lot of those tasks and ins and outs. Or, you know, it might be a one-person show, or it might just be procurement saying, hey, I got the approval to order, you know, 300 vans, and I don't know what to do. You guys take care of it. Like, I need you guys to handle everything. And so the nice thing about that is we're set up to help them, you know, so that they can achieve success. Like whatever phase they're at of that planning process and management process, we can plug in with that and we'll make sure that they're successful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's move on to our next quick pop-up survey, which we're going to call a quiz. Don't worry, there's no failing in the audience. But let's find out, how is your upfitter performing? You know, are they working out for you? Let's look at things like top-notch project management skills. That's the first one. True or false? Do they have top-notch project management skills? And is everybody hopefully seeing that? And we'll get some results rolling in here. And this should be just popping up on your screen. Select true or false. My upfit partner has top-notch project management skills. Okay, I'm not seeing answers. So either our audience has gone quiet or we're experiencing a quick technical difficulty here. If you guys had to say, what's the over under on this one? Do we think most do or don't?
Well, if you say they don't, you might be looking to make a change. So you might want to be quiet about that. But but if they do, I guess if they have top quality project management skills, if they're communicating, I think that's great. And so it's really finding the right partner that works best for you and your organization. So so that's a good thing. If you found someone that you like to work with that works well, I think that's great. I think for folks that don't have that, it's nice to know there are other options out there.
Yeah, true. Let's go to the next one. My upfitter takes action when hiccups arise. And so for our audience members, just take note of how many you're answering true versus false. Total up your false responses is where we're hoping to get by the end of this, and that'll give us our results. So the next one, my upfitter takes action when hiccups arise. And we'll give a minute there for those to roll in. It looks like, to go back to our results for the first one, 71% said their upfit partner does have top-notch project management skills. That's awesome. And almost 29% said not so much. So again, our next one is my upfitter takes action when hiccups arise. All right, looks like about 80% say that's true and about 20% say false. My upfitter rarely misses a delivery date. These are rolling in now. 42% say true and 57% say false. My upfitter reaches out to me more than I reach out to them. This is split. About 42% true and 57% false. Which one should it be, Shelby and Kevin? Should I, as a fleet manager, reach out to you more often, or should you be reaching out to me more often?
I guess it depends. I guess it can be both. Depending on, if the fleet manager has questions or needs something, yeah, reach out. I think it could be a split.
Well, I always think my teenage boys should reach out to me more than once a month, but
That's true. I have the same problem.
But they probably feel like it's enough if we communicate that often. So it's really about like what the customer needs from the customer's perspective. So if they're saying it's not enough, that's the right answer. And so really it's about learning what the customer needs are, because sometimes it's not just, I like to talk with somebody and I need to be, communicated with. It's, I have a meeting in 15 minutes or at the end of the week, and I have to communicate out what's going on. So I need routine, regular updates, or we have a hot fire thing going on. And so I've got to answer to this. And so that's where if you can get in a better cadence of understanding the customer, what their internal deliverables are to their stakeholders, you're much better set up for success with that communication.
Makes sense. Looks like our next one is, I rarely feel in the dark about what's happening with a vehicle. About 3/4 of our audience say true, which is great. And about 1/4 say false. And then our next one is, my upfitter will customize an upfit for the needs of my business. And again, we've got about 3/4 of the audience who say yes, they do that, and another 1/4 that say no, they don't. Then my upfitter talks with vehicle operators to learn how they can improve their product. This is a little bit more evenly split. So we're looking at 56% that say yes, they talk with my operators, and about half that say don't. So it sounds like that's maybe a little bit more rare in the market. And then finally, my upfitter teaches me about ways I can use upfitting to better my business. 2/3 about say yes, and about a third say no. Can you guys give me an example of that, of how an upfitter might teach someone to improve their business? Like, how does that work?
Well, I can tell you, I can give you an example of how we responded to maybe a industry need. So by getting close to the work and close to a lot of our customers, a couple years ago, we saw that a lot of the lead times were pushing out for pickup truck toppers, pickup truck caps. And so a lot of those lead times were pushing into the 18 to 20 to 25 weeks. And so if you have to wait half a year or longer to get a topper for your pickup truck, like that's a real issue. And so when we talked to those customers, they said, look, it's not about that specific topper, that company. We just need something to cover our pickup truck so we can get moving. So then because we listened to those folks, we ended up developing our own topper now that fits on top of pickup trucks. So that's kind of a solve for a market need versus like one unique specific need. And we've got those examples too. But Shelby, maybe you have something to go on that too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, when we're talking to customers, understanding what the company's goals and initiatives are overall, we can use that information to create solutions that meet those goals. So for an example, it can be you're looking to reduce payload to save on fuel, or so we can create an upfit that's lighter weight, or it can be, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but sustainability goals, things like that. So those are ways that we can help the overall business for our customers, not just, product related.
Sure.
Well, we've had a lot of with the rise of EVs and carbon neutral, footprint fleets and stuff. So it's been, well, how do I upfit this, but I don't want to drill into the battery? So can your engineering team work around those sorts of things? Or, hey, the solar business really took off on the West Coast, and that's part of my territory. But how do we customize a solar upfit or that sort of platform? So a lot of times we'll get in these conversations with companies, and they'll say, we've been doing the same thing for 10 or 15 or 30 years with our vehicles, and like, it's working okay, but like we've got new initiatives and new budget, and you've got someone who's kind of new in the chair in procurement or safety or whoever, and they're saying, look, we've got to do something. We've got to refine this. It's got to be a little bit better. And so, back to Shelby's point, it's like we have those conversations, and then all that stuff, those corporate goals get incorporated into the work and the build that we're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's another form of kind of customization for you guys, right? I mean, there's the product, and then there's just working to the need. Okay, for those of you in the audience who played along with our true false quiz, let's talk about how to score it. So if you got mostly true responses, your upfitter's probably doing a pretty good job. But if you got 3 or more false responses, it might be time to look for a partner that can deliver a little better for you. And that leads us to our next question, which is, how did your upfitter fare? Based on your true false responses, is your current upfit partner performing? Yes, no, or kind of. Or if you don't want to base this on your responses and just want to weigh in, maybe we didn't ask the thing that's a pain point for you or a selling point, but how are your people doing? Upfitter performing? Yes, no, a little bit. Let's give a little bit of time for answers to roll in. I know for you guys, if a customer answered, no, my partner is not performing well, you would get on that quickly. Have you ever had anybody
we would immediately over communicate with them.
Yeah, totally. How can we help?
Yeah, and like the way that we kind of framed this webinar today was about risk. So this isn't like black and white, good or bad. It's really about managing things that can go bump in the night. And so as much as we know about things that have gone bump in the night in the past, and so we're trying to predict things that'll happen in the future, we look for patterns. we're communicating with all those industry partners. And so it's kind of, we're charting a course, and so we're managing the risk on that course. So we're trying to watch out for icebergs or whatever, analogy you want to use on that course. But really it's about, there's no right or wrong answer. Maybe there could be some wrong answers, but there's no, exact path to follow. It's just about, can you be responsive? Do you have the experience? Are you communicating? Like those sorts of things, those kind of core Adrian Steele qualities, beliefs that we have that we think get us to an end result that really hits the mark for our customers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it looks here like about half their upfitter passed the quiz, and 20% did not, and 28% were kind of. So it's really interesting to see, that only about half are doing great according to these standards. So I want to make time for Q&A. I know we're coming up quickly on to the end of the webinar. We can go over just a little bit if you guys are comfortable with that to answer a few of these questions. So I'm just going to dig into it. This one starts with good day, which I think is so lovely. Good day. How do you deal with OEM delays? Does Adrian have something different with the ship through process?
How do we handle OEM delays with the ship through process? So, and I hope I'm answering this the right way. I'm thinking he's asking it this way, or she. So if we have visibility into those OEM timelines, so as far as like vehicle build dates and things like that, so we often will know if a date gets pushed out ahead of time. So we should be talking about that with the customer and then working with the installer to understand that delivery cadence and how we can work them into the schedules. So we've dealt with that many times because OEMs, their schedules can be all over the place, and they have been over the last few years, just with some of the changes. But as long as we know that, if we can see it, if you're communicating it, then we can manage it.
Fantastic.
I hope I answered that the right way. So if I didn't,
don't worry. We won't take a pop-up question to evaluate your response.
Yeah, we've had a couple of those for some of my customers recently, where we had a factory that closed for a month, and then we had another one where there was a fire at an aluminum plant, and so it's like, well, how do you manage that? And so from our standpoint, it's notify the customer, let them know what's going on. And then from our side, it's like, make sure that we have every other thing that we could possibly need for that outfit ready to go, so that once the vehicles come back online and they ship out of that OEM, that we have everything ready and there's no other delays that are self-inflicted or other supplier inflicted, because that's a long enough delay just waiting for that to come back online.
Right. Absolutely. And I want to remind the audience, you still have time to submit a couple questions. So put those in the chat if you want to submit a question. The next one is, what are some of the new upfit options on the market? What's new at Adrian or elsewhere?
We launched our Adrian caps, our toppers, last year. So we are continuing to develop them for various platforms. We have them for almost every pickup truck, from GM, Stellantis, Ford, Nissan. So if that's something that's new, our integrated truck solution. So when the mid-size vans kind of went away, our customers were looking for an alternative option. And so, we developed solutions for pickup trucks. A lot of our customers were transitioning to those, especially the mid-size. So we developed a solution that basically lets the driver access everything in their van, their tools, by pulling a slide out outside of the van or outside of the truck, so they don't have to get into the truck. It's been very successful with our customers. We've had a lot of positive feedback. We continue to get positive feedback on that as well. So that's something that's fairly new that we've developed. I don't know, can you think, Kevin, is there anything recent that the perimeter rack, the barn doors cap with barn doors. Those are two new things that we have.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the trends now is because vehicles are getting so expensive, is a lot of companies are trying to fit more in a smaller vehicle. So we've been transitioning full-size pickup trucks into smaller pickup trucks. We've been transitioning full-size vans into like a full-size pickup truck. Those sorts of kind of downsizing. We've seen some of that. One of the unique upfits that we are in process of, and we shipped a bunch of them this summer, is a mobile maintenance van. So we took a Bright Drop 600 van, an EV van, and we upfit it so they can do mobile maintenance service through the dealership network. And so I'm really excited. We've probably launched about 60 or 70 of those now to date. And, we're on our way to a couple hundred through the next year. But that's a really interesting upfit. It's very custom. It's really collaborative. There are about 5 different suppliers that all weighed in. Lots of engineering time and all that kind of stuff, design time. But the finished product it's really beautiful, and it's great to see in action. So I think it's going to generate a lot of revenue for that customer.
This is a quick one. What is the lead time on some of your toppers as of now, since you mentioned those, Shelby?
We have our lead time on our toppers is the same as our other manufactured product, which is a 5-day lead time for production. So when it's ordered, it can be produced within 5 days and shipped out. But for a ship through customer, it really depends on, when your vehicles are arriving. That product will be ready for when your vehicles are ready, which has been a game changer in the industry because, lead times on caps have been
horrible.
Long.
Yes, I can say more horrible because I've talked to some folks about that. And I know one thing you guys did to cut that lead time was, instead of storing toppers outside where they could be damaged by the weather, you found a way to store them inside and kind of just take that risk out of the equation. Is there anything else that you want to mention because if I'm listening to your response, I'm like, how do you get it in 5 days when it seems like it's, months and months for others?
Well, it's a knockdown version of a cap. So it ships in 5 different parts. So the advantage of that is that it's easy to ship, it's easy to stock, it's easy to replace one panel as opposed to an entire cap if there's damage. So that's been a real benefit to our customers. And that's how we avoid having to store it outside or having our installers store it outside.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I just love that that you've been able to crunch that. It's pretty amazing. And like you mentioned, if someone's topper, one panel gets damaged, you can just swap that out rather than ordering a whole new topper, paying for a whole new topper, and then waiting months and months again, which is not what anybody wants to do.
That's
okay,
one of the biggest.
that's
one of the biggest things we've heard. Sorry, is the just back to that is, can I get something that's American made, and can I get it quickly? And so if you have those two KPIs in your business, that's Adrian. We're, whether it's a topper, whether it's a Pro Lift ladder rack, and all the other parts that we make and manufacture, it's, we've had a lot of success in that, just responding to industry challenges around timing and delays and those sorts of things. So we're really proud of those, specifically those 2 products in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think you should be, for sure. Okay, we're past our time, so I want to ask one more question. And you guys tell me if you I maybe don't get this, but it says, could it be better just going out of stock maybe ordering out of stock instead of factory orders? I think
depends.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends. If I guess I'll explain it this way. If you're factory ordering and the timelines don't align with your expectations, so you need vehicles quickly, getting an out of stock vehicle and having it upfit in the field is probably the right option. I think that it can be more expensive, but if speed is your driver, then getting them out of stock would be a great option.
Yeah, it totally right on. It's a speed versus timing calculation. And the good news about if you're a fleet if you order out of stock and you say, I really like the upfit that my fleet vehicles have, that's where our road ready team can go ahead and get you that upfit. We can install the upfit that you have on the rest of your fleet for an out of stock vehicle in the market. So we'll have you covered. We talk about meeting customers where they're at. We'll have you covered no matter whether you factory order or go out of stock.
Yeah, that's big. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So I just want to thank you guys for being our upfitting experts and sharing all of your insights with us. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined today and submitted questions. If your question didn't get answered, don't worry. We're going to follow up with you individually via email and get you responses to your questions. So we just hope that you today enjoyed the webinar. And again, I want to thank you, Shelby, Kevin, and Adrian for today's presentation. You guys were so great, and I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys were great. And if anyone in the audience wants to take another look at this or perhaps share it with a colleague and pass on all the expertise that Shelby and Kevin provided, we will have the webinar on demand soon. So you can find that at the Work Truck website, worktruck.com/webinars. Again, that's worktruck.com/webinars. If you want to contact Adrian directly, that's also on the screen. Reach out to them via email or check out their website. And finally, on behalf of the entire Bobbitt and Work Truck teams, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you here again for our next Work Truck webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.